You ever feel invisible? Isaiah Brooks muttered to the wind, the words swallowed immediately by the hollow clatter of the city streets at 2:17 a.m. He crouched beneath the warped awning of a closed-down pharmacy on North Charles Street, his knees brushing against the wet concrete that smelled faintly of salt, rain, and the lingering smoke from a distant dumpster fire. The drizzle fell steadily, soaking the frayed edges of his worn green jacket and sticking his sweat-dampened hair to his forehead. In his hands, a single sandwich wrapped in wax paper pressed warm against his fingers, the last thing he had managed to scrounge from a corner deli after a long day wandering abandoned alleyways and flickering streetlights. Across the narrow street, neon signs flickered weakly, their glow reflecting off the puddles, casting fractured patterns that rippled with the movement of the water. The city had long stopped noticing him. It had stopped recognizing the subtle cadence of his steps, the careful precision with which he held his boots together, the quiet determination in his posture inherited from years of disciplined service in the Marine Corps. And yet, on this night, something else moved in the shadows, something that made Isaiah pause mid-bite, sandwich halfway to his lips. A figure emerged from the fog that hugged the corners of the street, her legs moving with a practiced, deliberate rhythm. A white German shepherd, fur matted and damp, its amber eyes glowing faintly in the muted neon light, approached him cautiously, but without fear. Isaiah froze, heart tightening as the dog stopped 3 feet away, sniffing the air with a precision only a K9 trained for service could possess. The rain fell over them both, sheets of it that made the world blur into gray streaks. Yet the moment was sharp, precise, unyielding. Isaiah reached slowly into the bag, breaking the sandwich in half, and held a piece out. "Here," he whispered, voice hushed but steady. "Take this. You're safe." The dog's ears pricked, tail low but wagging slightly, and with a careful step, it inched forward, nudging the offered piece with its wet nose. Isaiah's lips curved into the smallest semblance of a smile as the dog's amber eyes locked with his, a recognition sparking something older than memory, something forged in trust and quiet loyalty that neither time nor distance could sever. The drizzle turned to a light mist, and the neon puddles mirrored the unlikely pair, a man broken in body and circumstance, and a dog worn from hardships not of its own choosing, sharing a simple meal beneath the indifferent gaze of a city that had forgotten how to care. Halo, as Isaiah would come to call him in the following hours, settled beside Isaiah with a careful, measured grace, pressing a cold nose to the wax paper before retreating slightly to sit on damp concrete, keeping watch as if the city might decide to reclaim the shadows around them. Isaiah unwrapped the remaining half, letting the bread crumble between his fingers, the scent of ham and soft white bread filling the small bubble of space they occupied. He murmured, "Don't worry, soldier. We'll make it." And in that quiet declaration, beneath the flicker of streetlights and the whisper of the wind through empty alleyways, a bond began to form, subtle but unbreakable, a promise of trust that would ripple outward far beyond the soaked streets, far beyond the watchful eyes of those too busy to see, planting the seed of a miracle in the most unassuming place. A shared sandwich between a man the world ignored and a K9 whose loyalty knew no bounds. The night had not yet fully surrendered to dawn when Isaiah Brooks and Halo moved from the pharmacy, awning into the faint glow of a nearby street lamp, the mist wrapping around them like a soft, wet blanket. Halo padded silently beside Isaiah, ears alert and eyes scanning the quiet cityscape for anything out of place, every movement precise, the result of instincts honed over years of service training that Isaiah had once known well. The sidewalks were slick, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights and puddles that stretched across cracked concrete, and the distant hum of early traffic vibrated through the metal grates of the storm drains. Isaiah kept his hood low, his fingers curling around the remnants of the wax paper, careful not to tear it, careful not to waste a crumb, mindful of how fragile these moments of warmth could be. The fog was heavy now, a damp that seeped into bones, and yet there was a rhythm to their movement, a shared understanding that neither had to speak to maintain. Halo paused occasionally, sniffing the air, then returned to Isaiah's side, brushing lightly against his leg, as if confirming the path ahead. Isaiah walked with deliberate steps, avoiding puddles, listening to the subtle city sounds, the creak of a distant door, the soft rush of water from a gutter, the faint scuff of a rat fleeing beneath a dumpster, and found comfort in the normalcy of these small, overlooked details. Every few blocks, Isaiah would glance down at Halo, noting the way the dog held himself, muscles tense but controlled, eyes reflecting the dim streetlights with a sheen of amber intensity, and he allowed himself a fleeting smile at the thought that someone, something, had chosen to accompany him, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. As the night began to yield to the first hints of morning, the air cooled further, carrying a salty tang from the harbor blocks over a mile away, blending with the faint scent of wood smoke and wet asphalt. Isaiah kept moving, weaving through alleyways and over sidewalks cracked by frost and neglected roots, aware that this part of the city did not pause for anyone, least of all someone like him, but feeling that with Halo beside him, the invisibility he had carried for so long was softened, mitigated by the presence of loyalty so evident in every step the dog took. They passed a row of shuttered storefronts, the paint peeling, the glass dusty and cracked, and Isaiah heard the faint whisper of his own breath mingling with the mist, each exhalation visible, a ghostly trace in the pale light. Halo pressed close at one moment, nose flicking toward a sound Isaiah had not noticed, a distant thump on a metal fire escape, and Isaiah adjusted his pace, grateful for the canine vigilance that had once saved lives in more perilous circumstances, and now, in this quiet hour, kept him safe from the city's apathy. For the first time in months, Isaiah felt a small warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose tethered not to military orders but to the simple act of walking together, surviving another night, sharing a silent promise that they would not face the next hour alone. The city around them stirred subtly, a single car splashing through a puddle, a faint whistle of wind through a broken lamppost. Yet Isaiah and Halo moved through it with the focused calm of those who had learned to exist at the margins, the edges where most people did not care to look. Isaiah adjusted the hood further over his head, feeling the damp chill creep down the collar of his jacket, and yet the act of reaching a hand down to Halo, stroking the damp fur along the top of the dog's neck, brought a quiet solace. Halo leaned into the touch briefly, then returned to walking, steps measured, keeping pace with Isaiah, the two of them forming a rhythm that was unspoken yet complete. As they approached a small park that remained partially lit by the remnants of old city lamps, the mist began to lift just enough to reveal the skeletal shapes of benches and leafless trees, casting long shadows over the wet grass. Isaiah paused for a moment to look around, taking in the empty swings swaying gently in the wind, and he felt a subtle shift in his awareness, a sense that each night survived, each small act of sharing and trust, built an unseen bridge between him and the city. Halo, sensing the pause, stopped as well, ears tilting forward, eyes scanning the surroundings before settling once again on Isaiah, reinforcing the quiet connection that had formed in the cold, wet hours, a connection born of mutual reliance, patience, and unspoken understanding, setting the stage for the events that would follow as the first faint rays of morning light touched the horizon and the city slowly awoke to a pair that moved together unseen, yet profoundly intertwined. By the time the first pale light spread over Baltimore, the small park had begun to stir with the fragile sounds of morning, the rustle of wet leaves along the path, the distant grind of a city bus turning 2 blocks away, the soft click of a traffic signal changing for streets still mostly empty. Isaiah Brooks sat on the far end of a damp, wooden bench, his shoulders rounded beneath his old marine jacket, one hand tucked inside his sleeve for warmth, the other resting near Halo without holding him, because something in the white German shepherd's posture told him this dog did not need to be owned to stay. Halo sat at Isaiah's left side, straight-backed and still, his white coat drying in uneven patches, his amber eyes following every movement in the park with a calm that felt too disciplined for a stray. A jogger in a bright blue windbreaker slowed as she passed, staring for half a second too long before picking up speed again. A delivery driver crossed the sidewalk with a paper cup of coffee and glanced down at Halo, then at Isaiah, and looked away as if the sight made him uncomfortable. Isaiah knew that look. He had seen it outside shelters, outside diners, outside public buildings where the security guards were not cruel exactly, just tired of having to decide who belonged. He lowered his gaze to the cracks in the sidewalk, watching thin streams of rainwater carry cigarette ash and tiny leaves toward the curb. Halo did not look away. He watched people the way a trained sentry watches a gate, not with suspicion, but with purpose. When an older man walking a terrier came too close, the terrier barked sharply, pulling at its leash, but Halo did not answer. He simply shifted one paw forward, placed his body between the small dog and Isaiah, and waited until they passed. Isaiah noticed. He noticed the controlled breathing, the clean angles of the stance, the way Halo never crossed in front of him without checking back first. "You are not street-born," Isaiah said quietly, his voice rough from the cold. "Somebody taught you better than most people get taught." Halo flicked one ear, as though the words had landed somewhere familiar. A few minutes later, the park changed. A mother came through the gate pushing a stroller, her little girl walking beside her in pink rain boots, hopping over puddles with the fearless joy of someone who had not yet learned how quickly the world can turn. Isaiah looked down, not wanting to make the woman nervous. He had learned to make himself smaller in public spaces, even though he had once stood tall in uniform, even though he had once carried responsibility across desert roads under a sun so bright it made the horizon tremble. The girl laughed and ran ahead toward a flock of pigeons near the curb. At the same moment, a delivery van rolled backward from an alley across the street, its reverse signal muffled by morning traffic and wet pavement. Isaiah saw it late. The mother saw it later. Halo moved first. He did not bark wildly. He did not panic. He sprang from the bench with a clean burst of speed, crossing the wet grass and reaching the child before the moment could become tragedy. With surprising gentleness, he caught the loose fabric of her raincoat in his teeth and pulled her back just enough for the van to pass several feet in front of her. The driver stopped suddenly, eyes wide behind the windshield. The mother cried out and rushed forward, scooping her daughter into her arms. For one suspended second, the entire corner went silent. Even the pigeons lifted and scattered into the gray morning like torn paper. Isaiah stood slowly, his heart striking hard against his ribs, but Halo had already released the coat and stepped back, head low, tail still, as if expecting a command. The little girl stared at him, not afraid, only amazed. "Mommy," she whispered, "the snow dog saved me." The mother looked at Isaiah then, really looked at him, and something softened in her face. "Is he yours?" she asked, breathless. Isaiah opened his mouth, but the answer would not come easily. Ownership felt like the wrong word for a soul that had arrived in the rain and chosen its own place beside him. "No, ma'am," he said after a moment. He just stayed. A man near the coffee cart raised his phone, recording now, his expression caught between curiosity and disbelief. "That dog is trained," he said to no one in particular. "No way he is just wandering around." Isaiah turned toward Halo, and as the dog shook rain from his coat, the morning light caught the left side of his face. Beneath the damp white fur near his eye, Isaiah saw it clearly for the first time, a crescent-shaped scar, faint but unmistakable. His breath slowed. The sound of the city faded behind him, replaced by an old memory of dust, radio static, and a young corporal laughing beside a K9 with bright amber eyes. Isaiah took one careful step closer. Halo looked up at him, steady and waiting. Isaiah's fingers drifted toward the worn dog tag beneath his jacket, the one he had carried so long it had become less like metal and more like a piece of his own heart. "Where did you come from, boy?" he whispered. Halo leaned forward and pressed his nose against Isaiah's hand, and in that small touch, something buried deep inside the morning began to wake. The morning continued to unfold slowly, the mist retreating from the streets as sunlight crept over the rooftops, glinting off puddles and wet asphalt like scattered shards of glass. Isaiah Brooks and Halo moved from the park toward a quieter street lined with brick row houses, the air smelling faintly of baking bread and the distant tang of the harbor. The city was awakening, but still largely indifferent. The footsteps of commuters and the occasional rumble of an early delivery van echoing softly against empty storefronts. Halo padded beside Isaiah with a controlled grace, every muscle coiled and relaxed at the same time, as if aware of dangers the human eye could not see and joys the human heart might overlook. Isaiah adjusted the scarf around his neck, the damp cloth sticking slightly to his skin, and he noticed for the first time how cleanly Halo carried himself, a white silhouette of discipline and awareness in the shifting morning light. They approached a small corner cafe. Its windows steamed from brewing coffee, and a barista set a wooden sign outside announcing fresh pastries. Isaiah and Halo paused, not to enter, but to observe. People were beginning to trickle out of their homes, carrying briefcases, backpacks, smartphones pressed to ears, speaking in tones that blurred together in the crisp air. Halo's ears twitched, tail low but alert, eyes scanning each passerby with a patience that seemed almost human. Isaiah followed the gaze, seeing through Halo's alertness into the small acts of the city that went unnoticed. A man dropping coins into a busker's cup, a child chasing a leaf across the sidewalk, a woman pausing to help an elderly neighbor with a bag. The simplicity of these gestures contrasted sharply with the indifference and distance the city often carried toward those like Isaiah. Halo shifted slightly, nudging Isaiah's leg with a damp nose, pulling his attention back to the moment at hand, reminding him that even in a world so large and impersonal, connection could be found in small, deliberate actions. They continued down the street, past a mural fading with years of weather, depicting a soldier reaching out to a dog, and Isaiah allowed himself a faint smile at the coincidence. Halo paused at a crosswalk, looking both ways before stepping lightly onto the asphalt, weaving around a puddle, his movements precise, instinctual, controlled. Isaiah felt a flicker of familiarity in the dog's rhythm, a silent conversation carried out in steps and glances, an unspoken agreement of trust. As they reached the edge of a small square, a street cleaner began his route, and the soft swish of bristles against wet pavement mixed with the early song of a sparrow perched on a lamp post. Halo remained steady, eyes following the small bird for a moment, then returning to Isaiah, whose fingers brushed lightly against the dog's damp fur. The city seemed to hold its breath for a few moments, the combination of mist, early sun, and quiet movement creating a suspended reality where nothing harmful could intrude. Isaiah paused at a corner bench, the wood still damp from last night's rain, and sat down, letting Halo settle beside him, tail curled neatly along the edge. He observed the people passing, noticing how Halo's calm presence seemed to influence their pace subtly, slowing hurried footsteps, softening glances, creating a ripple of attention in a world often too preoccupied to notice. Isaiah felt a warmth that had little to do with the sun, the kind that comes from being seen, even in the eyes of a dog, and the shared awareness that they were navigating the same space, the same moments, and that this connection had created a small, private order in the midst of the sprawling, indifferent city. Halo lifted his head occasionally, scanning the environment, then lowered it again, eyes softening as they met Isaiah's, and in that quiet exchange, Isaiah realized that for all the city's blindness, for all the indifference of passers-by, a bond had formed, subtle but steadfast, and that this morning, ordinary and unremarkable to anyone else, was filled with a rare, fragile kind of assurance and promise that only those who have shared the cold, the hunger, and the watchfulness could understand. The streets were beginning to hum with activity as the morning sun climbed higher, casting long, golden beams across the damp sidewalks and illuminating the faint mist that still lingered in low corners. Isaiah Brooks and Halo moved from the park toward the busier avenues of the city, the white K9 walking clothes, his coat catching the light in a way that seemed almost ethereal, each step measured and confident. Isaiah felt the weight of the day pressing down, but with Halo by his side, he moved with a cautious determination, eyes scanning the people and buildings around him, noticing small details he would have otherwise missed, a piece of paper fluttering against a lamppost, the reflection of a cyclist in a puddle, a pigeon shaking raindrops from its wings. Halo paused suddenly near a newspaper box, ears pricked, tail low but attentive, sensing something Isaiah could not, a subtle tension in the air that made him shift his footing. Isaiah followed the dog's gaze and saw a man in a sharp suit, briefcase in hand, moving quickly past, looking down at the ground as though avoiding recognition, and Halo adjusted his position slightly, placing himself between Isaiah and the street, a quiet sentinel observing every movement. They continued down a side street lined with old brick buildings, the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread rising from a small corner cafe, mingling with the crisp morning air and the faint scent of wet asphalt. Isaiah let his hand drift toward Halo, brushing against the damp fur on the dog's neck, and Halo leaned slightly into the touch, a subtle acknowledgement of trust that needed no words. They passed a row of parked cars, each reflecting the morning sun on their hoods, and Isaiah noticed the subtle shift in Halo's posture as the dog registered the distant sounds of a delivery truck approaching, its tires skimming over puddles and creating ripples that reflected the surrounding buildings in fractured patterns. Isaiah took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and he realized that the simple act of walking beside Halo in the city streets had created a rhythm, a cadence that allowed him to feel present in a world that had long ignored him. As they reached the corner of a small plaza, a group of early commuters crossed the intersection, their hurried footsteps and murmured conversations blending into a soft urban chorus. Halo remained composed, scanning each face with the precision of a trained observer, and Isaiah marveled at the dog's patience, the way he balanced attentiveness with calm, never overreacting, never alarming those around him, yet commanding a subtle authority simply by presence. A child ran past on a tricycle, laughing, and Halo's ears flicked toward the sound, tail lowering slightly, but eyes maintaining focus on Isaiah. The man instinctively reached down to adjust the scarf around his neck, feeling the cool fabric against his skin, and he noticed the small details in Halo's expression, a slight lift of the brow, a careful sniffing of the air, a shift of weight forward, as if the dog were anticipating the flow of the city around them. Isaiah allowed himself a quiet smile, the first in hours, acknowledging the simple, steadfast companionship of the K9 at his side. They reached a quiet alleyway, the walls streaked with rainwater and graffiti, and Isaiah paused to let Halo check the surroundings, noting the subtle signs of movement and sound that indicated the city was alive even in these less frequented spaces. Halo moved ahead a few feet, sniffing carefully, then turned back, eyes meeting Isaiah's in a moment of silent communication, confirming that the path was safe. Isaiah adjusted the strap of his worn bag across his shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of personal effects and the dog tag tucked beneath his jacket, a reminder of past service and the discipline that had shaped him. The alley led them back to a busier street, where sunlight reflected brightly off shop windows and the distant hum of traffic grew stronger. Isaiah walked with measured steps, Halo beside him, the city around them beginning to acknowledge their presence subtly, through glances, pauses, and soft shifts in attention. Each step carried a quiet sense of continuity, of shared purpose, of connection forged not by words but by observation, trust, and the unspoken understanding that they were navigating the same world together, moving through spaces that were indifferent, yet becoming meaningful through their combined awareness and steadfast companionship. By mid-morning, the city had fully opened its eyes, though not its heart, and the quiet companionship Isaiah Brooks had found in the rain began to draw the kind of attention he had spent months trying to avoid. They had reached Lexington Market, where the sidewalks widened and the air carried the mixed scents of coffee, fried potatoes, bus exhaust, and wet stone warming under the sun. People moved around them in quick currents, office workers checking watches, vendors unlocking metal shutters, students crossing the street with earbuds in and backpacks swaying, each person carried by a private urgency. Isaiah kept to the edge of the flow, his shoulders slightly turned, one hand close to the worn strap of his bag, the other loose at his side where Halo could brush against it whenever the crowd pressed too close. The white German shepherd did not wander. He stayed at Isaiah's left knee, eyes forward, ears making small corrections toward every sudden sound, a bicycle bell, a rolling cart, the hiss of a city bus kneeling at the curb. To most people, Halo looked beautiful. To Isaiah, he looked trained. There was a difference. Beauty made strangers stare. Training made Isaiah's chest tighten with memory. Near a glass-fronted office building across the square, a black sport utility vehicle stopped beside the curb with the smooth confidence of money arriving exactly where it pleased. Its paint reflected the city in dark, polished waves. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat, expensive leather gloves, and the calm expression of someone who had never had to explain why he belonged anywhere. He was in his late 40s, tall, neatly groomed, with silver at his temples and eyes that scanned the sidewalk like inventory. 2 employees followed him, both wearing navy jackets with the same small emblem on the chest. Langford Security Solutions. Halo saw him before Isaiah did. The dog stopped so suddenly that Isaiah nearly took another step without him. A low breath moved through Halo's chest, not quite a growl, but close enough to turn the morning colder. Isaiah looked down. The dog's body had changed. His tail was still. His ears stood sharp. His eyes were locked across the square. The man in the charcoal coat noticed the dog, and for one brief second his polished face lost its shape. Surprise crossed it first, then calculation. Then a smile arrived, thin and practiced. He walked toward them slowly, his shoes avoiding every puddle as if the street itself owed him cleanliness. "Well," the man said, stopping several feet away, "there he is." Isaiah did not answer. He felt Halo shift closer, the dog's shoulder pressing lightly against his leg. The man's gaze moved over Isaiah's jacket, his damp cuffs, his worn boots, the old bag at his side, and finally returned to Halo with something that looked less like relief than possession. "That animal belongs to my company," he said. He was reported missing from a private training facility outside the city. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "He found me. That is not ownership." The words came smooth and cold. "That is inconvenience." One of the employees stepped forward with a slip lead coiled in his hand, not raised, not threatening, just present enough for everyone nearby to understand what was expected. The crowd began to slow. A woman holding a coffee cup paused near the curb. 2 teenagers lifted their phones. A vendor stopped stacking fruit. Isaiah felt dozens of eyes settle on him with that familiar weight, the silent question the city asked whenever a man with no address stood in the way of someone with a business card. The man extended a gloved hand. "Victor Langford," he said, "I will handle this from here." Isaiah looked at the hand and did not take it. "He is hungry," he said. "He is cold. He has been out all night." Victor's smile sharpened by a fraction. "Then you did him a temporary kindness. That does not give you the right to keep a valuable working dog." Halo's ears flicked at the word valuable, but his eyes never left Victor. Isaiah noticed it then, the same faint tension that had moved through the dog near the alley, the same watchfulness that was more memory than fear. "What is his name?" Isaiah asked. Victor paused. "Not long. Just long enough. That information is internal." Isaiah breathed out slowly, feeling the old Marine discipline settle over him like a coat heavier than the one on his shoulders. A handler knows a dog's name. Around them, the square grew quieter. Victor's eyes narrowed, though his voice stayed polite. And a man living on a bench should be careful about pretending to understand things above his station. The sentence landed without volume, but it carried the sting of a door closing. Isaiah felt heat rise behind his eyes, not from anger alone, but from the exhaustion of being measured by his hunger instead of his history. Halo stepped one paw forward, not toward Victor, toward Isaiah. The white K9 leaned his body against him, firm and deliberate, as if making a choice in front of the whole city. Victor's employee lifted the slip lead a little higher. Isaiah lowered his hand near Halo's neck, not gripping, not claiming, only steadying. His voice came out quiet, almost too quiet for the gathering crowd. "Easy, Marine." Halo froze. His head lifted. His body aligned beside Isaiah in a perfect service stance, left shoulder near Isaiah's knee, eyes forward, breath controlled. The employee stopped moving. Victor's smile vanished. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered, "Did you see that?" Isaiah looked down at the white dog, and the crescent scar near Halo's eye caught the sun again, pale against pale fur, like a mark left by a story no one had finished telling. Then Halo did something that made the square fall still. He raised his right paw and placed it gently on Isaiah's boot, holding it there as if answering a command older than words, older than ownership, older than the cold. Paperwork men used to hide the truth. Isaiah swallowed hard. His fingers found the dog tag beneath his jacket. Victor saw the movement, and for the first time that morning, fear moved across his face like a shadow passing over glass. The silence around Lexington Market did not last long, because silence in a city is never empty. It fills quickly with breath, suspicion, camera clicks, and the soft murmur of people realizing they may have just witnessed something they were not meant to see. Isaiah Brooks stood still while Halo's paw rested on his boot, the touch light but certain, like a seal pressed into wax. Victor Langford's face recovered almost at once, the fear smoothed away beneath a polished mask, but Isaiah had seen it. So had the woman near the coffee cart, the one with auburn hair tucked beneath a navy knit cap, and a press badge clipped crookedly to the strap of her bag. Her name was Grace Miller, and she had come to the market that morning chasing a small story about rising food prices, nothing more. But now her phone was raised, recording, her eyes fixed not on Victor's expensive coat or Isaiah's worn boots, but on the white K9 standing between them with the solemn stillness of a witness. "Sir," Grace called, stepping closer but keeping her voice calm. "You said the dog belongs to your company. Can you provide public documentation?" Victor turned his head just enough to acknowledge her, and his smile returned, thinner than before. "This is a private matter. A private matter happening on a public sidewalk," Grace said. Isaiah did not know her, but there was something steady in her tone, not loud, not dramatic, simply unwilling to be moved aside. Halo lowered his paw from Isaiah's boot and shifted his weight, his nose lifting toward Victor's employees. The man holding the slip lead glanced at his employer, uncertain now, his confidence weakened by the phones pointed in his direction. Grace moved 2 steps closer, and Halo did not react to her except to glance once, measure her, and return his focus to Victor. That single calm look gave Isaiah enough trust to speak. "Ask him the dog's name," Isaiah said. Grace turned the phone slightly toward Victor. "What is the dog's name?" Victor gave a small laugh, the kind meant to make others feel foolish. "Identification records are kept at the facility." "Then what is his identification number?" Grace asked. Victor's jaw tightened. "I will not discuss proprietary security assets on the street." At that phrase, Isaiah felt Halo stiffen beside him, and suddenly the old memory sharpened, no longer a blur of dust and radio static, but a morning overseas when Corporal Marcus Reed had knelt beside a white shepherd and tapped 2 fingers against his own boot. The dog had placed a paw there just as Halo had done moments ago. A handler recognition signal, Marcus had said, grinning like a man proud of the only family he carried into dangerous places. Isaiah's fingers trembled as he pulled the dog tag from beneath his jacket. The metal was dull with age, the chain worn smooth against his chest. On one side was his own name. On the other, scratched by hand years ago with a pocket knife, were 3 characters Isaiah had refused to forget. H17. Grace saw his hand close around the tag. "What is that?" she asked softly. Isaiah looked at Halo, at the crescent scar near his eye, at the amber gaze that seemed to be waiting for him to catch up to a truth the dog had carried alone. "I knew a Marine named Marcus Reed," Isaiah said, his voice low, the words struggling through years of grief. "He worked with a white K9 overseas. Handler called him Halo because he looked like a piece of light walking through smoke." The crowd quieted again, but this time it was different. Not shock. Reverence. Grace's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Isaiah. "Are you saying this is the same dog?" Isaiah swallowed. "I am saying that scar was there before. I am saying that signal was his. I am saying the number on my tag matches what I remember." Grace crouched carefully, not reaching for Halo, only angling her phone toward the thick fur at the side of his neck where rain and dirt had dried into pale ridges. "May I?" she asked Isaiah, though everyone knew she was really asking the dog. Halo did not move away. Isaiah brushed the fur gently with 2 fingers, parting it near the collar line that no collar now occupied. Beneath the white coat, almost hidden against the skin, was a small tattooed marking, faded but legible. K9, H17. A sound moved through the crowd, soft and collective, like wind passing under a church door. Grace's face changed. Not excitement. Recognition. "That is impossible," she whispered. Victor stepped forward. "Enough." His voice remained controlled, but the warmth had left it entirely. This animal was legally transferred into private training custody. Grace stood slowly. "According to whose records?" Victor did not answer. Isaiah looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time he saw not a powerful man, but a nervous one dressed in expensive fabric. Grace lowered her phone for just a second and spoke to Isaiah as if they were the only 2 people there. 2 years ago, I covered a warehouse fire outside Dundalk. Langford Security reported several retired service dogs lost in that incident. One of them was listed as K9, H17. Isaiah felt the market tilt beneath him. Halo pressed closer, his shoulder firm against Isaiah's leg. Listed as lost? Isaiah asked. Grace nodded, her voice barely above the city noise. Lost on paper. Victor's employee with the slip lead took a step back. A bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere, a vendor's radio played an old gospel song so softly it seemed to rise from the pavement itself. Isaiah crouched beside Halo, his knees protesting, his hand resting lightly on the dog's damp white coat. Marcus saved my life, he whispered. And you found me with the last half of a sandwich. Halo leaned forward and touched his nose to the old dog tag in Isaiah's palm. The gesture was so small that some in the crowd missed it, but Grace did not. Her camera caught everything. The faded number, the old tag, Victor's silence, and the white K9 choosing the homeless Marine over the man who called him property. In that moment, the story stopped belonging to the sidewalk. It began moving through phones, through messages, through offices and living rooms and police desks, carried by the kind of truth no locked file cabinet can hold forever. By noon, Baltimore had become too loud for Victor Langford to control. The video Grace Miller posted from Lexington Market moved faster than traffic on East Baltimore Street, faster than rumors in a courthouse hallway, faster than any statement his company could draft behind tinted glass. It passed from phone to phone, from coffee shops to office elevators, from veterans groups to local newsrooms, carrying the image of a white K9 pressing his nose to an old dog tag, while a homeless Marine knelt beside him with reins still dried in the seams of his jacket. By 1 o'clock, Grace was no longer alone. A city animal welfare officer arrived first, a woman named Teresa Cole, with silver hair tucked beneath a baseball cap, and the careful hands of someone who had spent years earning the trust of frightened animals. Then came 2 Baltimore police officers, not rushing, not making a scene, but watching Victor with the quiet seriousness of people who had started to understand that this was not about a loose dog on a sidewalk. Isaiah stood near the curb with Halo at his side, one hand resting lightly on the white shepherd's shoulder. He expected someone to tell him to move along. He expected the old pattern to return, the polite dismissal, the look over his shoulder, the assumption that because he owned almost nothing, his words weighed almost nothing too. But Grace kept speaking his name. Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks, United States Marine Corps, honorably discharged. Witness to K9, H17's prior service connection. Each word seemed to place a brick under his feet. Teresa scanned Halo with a handheld microchip reader, passing it slowly over his neck and shoulders while the crowd held its breath. The device chirped once. Then again. Teresa looked at the number on the screen, and her face tightened with disbelief. This chip was marked inactive, she said. Grace turned her camera slightly. Inactive meaning what? Teresa lowered her voice, but not enough to hide it. Meaning this animal was recorded as deceased. Victor's attorney had arrived by then, stepping from a sedan with a leather folder in hand, and immediately began speaking about private contracts, civil misunderstandings, chain of custody, and procedural review. The words floated above the sidewalk like smoke. Isaiah heard them, but Halo did not care about papers. Halo had turned toward the east, nose lifted, body suddenly rigid. His ears angled toward a sound no human seemed to hear beneath the buses and voices and market traffic. Isaiah felt it before he understood it. The same shift from that morning in the park, the same silent message passing from dog to man. He knows something, Isaiah said. One officer looked at him. Knows what? Isaiah kept his eyes on Halo. Where he came from. Teresa did not dismiss him. That alone felt like mercy. She unclipped a long, soft lead from her belt and offered it, not to Victor, but to Isaiah. Would he walk for you? Isaiah looked down. Halo looked back. No command was needed. They moved through the city in a strange procession, Grace recording from a respectful distance, Teresa beside her, the officers following, Victor and his attorney several steps behind, trying and failing to look unworried. Halo led them away from the market, past blocks where old brick warehouses stood shoulder to shoulder with new apartment buildings, past chain-link fences darkened by rain, toward the industrial edge near Dundalk where the harbor smell grew stronger and gulls circled above flat gray roofs. The air changed there. It carried diesel, salt water, rust, and something shut away too long. Isaiah felt his stomach tighten. This was the kind of place where forgotten things were stored until people stopped asking about them. Halo stopped outside a low warehouse with faded white paint and a sign so weathered the letters had nearly disappeared. Langford Training Annex. The gate was closed, but not locked. One officer pushed it open, and the hinges gave a long, tired groan. Victor said, "You do not have authorization to enter private property." Grace answered without looking at him. "Then why is the city grant number painted on the door?" No one spoke after that. Inside, the warehouse was dim but not dark, thin sunlight slipping through high windows clouded with dust. It was not a place of visible cruelty. That made it worse in a quieter way. There were empty kennels, stacked food bowls, old training mats, cabinets of files, and a row of collars, hanging from hooks like names waiting for voices. Halo moved slowly now, not afraid, but solemn, as if walking through a memory he wished had never existed. Teresa opened one cabinet and found folders labeled with numbers instead of names. K9, H12, K9, H14, K9, H17. Grace photographed each one. An officer called from the rear room, his voice careful. "We have living dogs back here." Isaiah closed his eyes for 1 second. 3 retired working dogs were found in clean but lonely enclosures, alive, quiet, underweight, and watching the humans with the wary patience of animals who had learned not to expect footsteps to mean kindness. Teresa went to them first, speaking softly, offering her hand low. Halo stood beside Isaiah, trembling now, not from fear, but from recognition. On a metal shelf near the office door, Grace found a box of old identification tags, donation receipts, transfer forms, and grant letters stamped with promises about rehabilitation, adoption, and veteran support. Promises that had been filed away while the dogs disappeared from public records. Victor said nothing. His silence had finally become louder than his voice. Isaiah stepped toward the folder marked K9, H17. Inside was a photograph of Halo beside Corporal Marcus Reed, younger, brighter, both of them standing under a training yard flag. Isaiah touched the edge of the photograph with 2 fingers. The memory came gently this time, not like pain, but like a hand on his shoulder. Marcus laughing. Halo waiting. The sun burning white over a world none of them fully understood. Grace stood beside him, her own voice softened. "This is enough." Outside, police radios murmured. Teresa began arranging transport for the dogs. The officers secured the records. Victor was escorted to a waiting car for questioning, his coat still spotless, his face no longer arranged into a smile. No one cheered. Justice, when it is real, does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it sounds like a kennel door opening, like a collar tag being read aloud, like a dog taking one free step into sunlight after the world had already written him off. Isaiah walked out last with Halo beside him. The white shepherd paused at the doorway, lifted his face into the harbor wind, and breathed as though the city had finally given him back his name. The afternoon sun filtered through the half-open blinds of the small veteran housing unit that Isaiah Brooks had been assigned, casting narrow stripes of light across the room, dust motes drifting lazily in the air. The space was modest, furnished with a single bed, a small table, and a chair, but it smelled of clean sheets, brewed coffee, and a hint of the sea carried in from the harbor breeze outside. Halo padded quietly inside, tail low and calm, moving toward the corner where a worn mat had been placed for him, sniffing the new surroundings with measured curiosity. Isaiah set down his bag, the dog tag heavy in his palm, and sank into the chair, the tension from the morning finally slipping from his shoulders in waves. Outside, the city hummed with the usual energy, the distant siren of an ambulance, the rattle of a trolley over tracks, the murmur of conversations that drifted in from the street below. But inside, the space held a kind of quiet grace, a sanctuary carved from circumstance and the bond between man and dog. Isaiah reached down and tore a fresh sandwich in half, placing one piece on a small plate for Halo. The dog approached carefully, sniffing, then taking the bread with a gentle bite, settling on the mat to chew with dignity. Isaiah ate the other half slowly, savoring the warmth of the food, the stability of the moment, the simple reassurance that they were safe for now. The morning events, the warehouse, the documents, Victor Langford's silence, Grace Miller's recording. All of it began to settle into a coherent memory, no longer chaos, but a narrative of justice quietly achieved. Halo lay next to the bed, head resting near Isaiah's knee, amber eyes following each subtle movement. Isaiah reached down and ran a hand along the dog's side, feeling the soft, dense coat, noting the faint scars along the shoulder, the curve of the paw that had once pressed into his boot in recognition. Outside, the city continued unaware of the lives that had shifted that day, but inside, every glance, every shared breath was a testament to what could happen when patience, observation, and a small act of care converged. Isaiah picked up the dog tag again, turning it slowly between his fingers, feeling the weight of years and memory, of comrades lost and promises kept. Halo lifted his head, ears tilting, and Isaiah spoke softly. "We have a lot of quiet days ahead, soldier." The dog rested his chin against Isaiah's thigh as if agreeing, and for a few moments, neither moved, neither spoke, only breathing in the stillness, feeling the continuity of presence, the kind of understanding that transcends words. Through the window, a shaft of sunlight caught the tag, glinting, reminding Isaiah of Marcus Reed, of the service they had shared, of the loyalty that had persisted beyond circumstance and neglect. A faint wind carried the city's noise inside, and Halo's ears twitched at each distant sound, but the dog remained calm, a sentinel without task, chosen and trusted. Isaiah leaned back, letting the chair support him, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel seen, acknowledged not by the city at large, but by the creature who had accompanied him through storm, fog, and indifference. The warmth of the afternoon seeped into the room, brushing against their skin and fur, softening the edges of the outside world that had so often been cold and unyielding. A small clock ticked somewhere on a wall, marking time in a rhythm that mattered only to them, and Isaiah realized that the day, the city, the chaos outside could no longer dictate the measure of his worth. Halo lifted a paw, resting it gently on Isaiah's knee once more, and the gesture carried everything: trust, recognition, companionship, and the quiet miracle that had unfolded from a half-shared sandwich to the restoration of a life overlooked. Isaiah smiled, the first genuine smile of the day, the kind that reaches the eyes and settles into the chest, and Halo's tail thumped softly against the floor, a punctuation to the moment. Together, they sat in the light, the room filled with a calm so deep it almost drowned out the city.